Joseph Stalin. Just hearing that name, right? It immediately brings to mind one of the 20th century's most ruthless and consequential dictators. This was a man who took the Soviet Union and transformed it from a land of peasants into an industrial and military superpower. But, and this is a huge but, he built that power on a foundation of absolute terror and the blood of millions.
Okay, let's just start with this, because it's a pretty chilling piece of foreshadowing, and it comes from the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution himself, Vladimir Lenin. Even a hardened revolutionary like him saw something dangerous, something unscrupulous in the man who would one day succeed him. It was a warning that, as we'll see, went completely unheeded.
You know, the name itself tells you almost everything you need to know. He wasn't born Stalin. His real name was Yosib Zhugavashvili. He chose Stalin, the Man of Steel, as one of his revolutionary code names, and it's the one that stuck. And honestly, it perfectly defined the iron-fisted, unyielding, and ice-cold nature of his rule.
So the big question is, how did this guy go from being a background player in a world-changing revolution to the absolute master of the whole show? It wasn't some sudden power grab. No, it was a slow, patient, and really methodical climb from the administrative shadows right to the center of all power.
Well, his early life was all about rebellion. He was born into poverty in Georgia, and his mom actually wanted him to become a priest. But let's just say he was way more interested in communism than theology. He got himself kicked out of the seminary for his revolutionary activities and pretty quickly became a full-time agitator, organizing strikes and passing out illegal pamphlets against the Tsar.
Now, this timeline, it's super revealing. It shows you his strategy. And man, was it patient. See, unlike the famous speaker Trotsky, Stalin was the administrator, the organizer. And that 1922 appointment as Secretary General, that was the absolute key. You'd think Secretary General, that sounds kind of boring, right? A desk job. But that was his genius. It gave him control over the entire party machine. He controlled who got hired, who got promoted, who got fired. From that seemingly dull position, he slowly and meticulously got rid of his opponents and filled the party with people loyal to him. By the time his rivals even knew what was happening, it was too late. He was untouchable.
Okay, so with his main rival, Trotsky, exiled and eventually assassinated, Stalin is now the supreme ruler. And what does he do? He launches this absolutely brutal campaign to turn the Soviet Union into an industrial giant. And he was willing to pay any price in human lives to make it happen.
The goal here was insane. Modernization at a speed nobody had ever even dreamed of. The idea was that for a true socialist state to exist, it needed a powerful industrial base. So the 5-year plans were designed to turn a peasant society into an industrial powerhouse, like overnight. But the methods he used to get there, they were nothing short of barbaric.
I mean, he basically declared war on his own people in the countryside. He forced millions of peasants off their private land, telling them they had to join these massive state-controlled collective farms. And when they resisted, especially the more successful farmers they called kulaks, Stalin's response was just merciless. He literally set out to liquidate the kulaks as a class, and the state just seized everything they owned.
And here's the thing. This policy wasn't just unbelievably cruel. It was a total economic disaster. Forcing collectivization completely wrecked food production. It didn't lead to more efficiency like they promised. No, it led directly to one of the most horrific famines in all of human history.
Yeah, just take a second and let that number sink in. An estimated 10 million people, mostly peasants in Ukraine, starved to death between 1932 and 1933. And this wasn't a natural disaster. This wasn't some random drought. This was a direct consequence of Stalin's policies. It was man-made. But the terror didn't stop in the countryside. Oh no. To make sure his power was absolute, to crush any tiny hint of opposition, Stalin started a series of purges that swept through every single level of Soviet society. Absolutely no one was safe. Look, we'll probably never know the exact number, but the estimates are just staggering. We're talking tens of millions of political victims. This includes old Bolsheviks who had been with him since the revolution, top military officers, artists, scientists, and just countless ordinary people accused of plotting against the state.
So that's what's happening at home. But on the world stage, Stalin was a whole different kind of player. A totally pragmatic, totally cynical master of the game, driven only by what was best for the Soviet state.
Okay, this was a move that just shocked everybody. I mean, think about it. The leader of the communist world makes a deal with Adolf Hitler, his fascist archenemy. This pact basically gave both of them a green light to invade and carve up Poland, which is what directly kicked off World War II. It was a deal made in hell, plain and simple.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? The incredible pivot. On the one hand, you've got the World War II ally. After Hitler, of course, betrayed him and invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin became a crucial partner for Britain and the United States. But then, look at the other side. The second the war was over, that alliance just fell apart. He broke his promise for free elections in Eastern Europe, installed communist puppet governments, and just like that, became the West's #1 enemy, sparking the Cold War. And that's where we get this famous line from Winston Churchill. It just perfectly captured the grim new reality of the world. Stalin's actions after the war had literally sliced Europe in two, creating this heavily armed border between the democratic West and the Soviet-controlled East. That Iron Curtain would define global politics for the next 45 years. Then, on March 5, 1953, Stalin suddenly dies of a stroke, and he leaves behind this nation that he had completely transformed, but also completely traumatized. So the big question is, what happens next? How does a country even begin to confront the legacy of a man who is both its god and its monster?
And this was the huge, huge challenge for the Soviet Union. How do you even begin to deal with that? Your national hero, the man who defeated the Nazis, was also a mass murderer responsible for the deaths of millions of his own people. How do you untangle that? How do you dismantle what they called his cult of personality?
Well, the answer was this process they called de-Stalinization. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It began in 1956 when the new guy, Nikita Khrushchev, gave this so-called secret speech where he just lays into Stalin's crimes. Then came the symbolic stuff like taking his body out of the place of honor next to Lenin and renaming Stalingrad, the site of his greatest victory, to Volgograd. It was a real attempt to separate the state from its most monstrous leader. And really, that's the thing to remember. Because even after they tore down the statues and renamed the cities, the system he built, that centralized control, that culture of fear, it stuck around. His shadow loomed over the Soviet Union right up until its very end, a chilling reminder of how one man's ruthless ambition can forge, and ultimately break, an entire nation, leaving a legacy of steel and blood that, honestly, we're still trying to get our heads around today.